Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to the second annual Pride panel hosted by Forge Health. Forge Health is on a mission to make mental health and substance use care effective, affordable, and accessible. We offer in-person and telehealth treatment options that are personalized, evidence-based, and in-network. Today's discussion will focus on the impact of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy on LGBTQ+ mental health for those who served. Introduced in 1993, the policy led to several negative consequences for the LGBTQ+ community, including service members being discharged and limiting their access to benefits, healthcare, and burial rights in a VA cemetery. Service members were forced to hide their identity, loved ones, and even caregivers. While the policy has been repealed for over a decade now, the lasting effects are still seen today. Joining us for this important discussion are several fabulous panelists. Starting, I would like to introduce to you Lindsay Church, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Lindsay, I'll pass it to you for an intro.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay. I use they and them pronouns. I'm excited to be here today and to be a part of this topic. I served in the Navy from 2008 to 2012. All but 3 months of my service was under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I got out in 2012 after I was medically retired, went home, tried to find myself, and found myself starting Minority Veterans of America with one of my best friends out of Seattle, Washington. We're founded in 2017 as an intersectional movement of minority veterans working on issues of race, gender, sexual orientation, and religion, recognizing that each of these communities has unique intersections and recognizing that the intersectionality means disparities that we must face as a community. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And with that, we have Agent Q, who is an independent special projects professional, a former global marketing communications vice president in fashion, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, and a board director of Minority Veterans of America. Agent Q.
Hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here, and this is one of the first spaces that I've been in that really focuses on needs for veterans and veterans health. My background is I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served during Desert Storm, Desert Shield, a little bit pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then into Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I have a different sort of viewpoint. But after the Marine Corps, I love people and communication. So I quickly got into fashion, PR, and communications in the music industry and worked for global brands like Karl Lagerfeld, Tommy Hilfiger, and was really focused on strategy, expanding businesses, and just developing the overall brand story, which I'm excited about. And I'm really excited to be here today and talk about my experience and share in relation to mental health and what's going on with veterans. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Eric Golnick, who is co-founder and CEO of Forge VFR, and also a U.S. Navy veteran. Eric?
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming. Eric Golnick. I started Forge a long time ago, it feels like now, but was a U.S. Navy veteran, served from 2008 to 2012. So Lindsay, I guess we were both in the Navy around the same time. Yeah. But served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell for the majority of the time as well. As a lot of folks know, I started Forge after kind of overcoming a lot of.
That's the Navy CEO.
Oh, Kirsten, do you mind muting yourself?
I am so sorry.
No, you're good.
Good.
You're good. Hey, at least that was that was mild, right? They didn't say anything too bad. Anyway, so for me, serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and one of the reasons I wanted to get this going is we talk a lot in DC about the policy implications, but we don't talk a lot about the mental health implications of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, of serving under this policy, and the things that we all went through as a result and continue to go through dealing with healthcare and mental health. So thank you for all attending.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And last but not least, I would like to introduce to you Laura Miller, who is a senior social scientist at the RAND Corporation. Laura?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate. I first became engaged with this topic over 30 years ago, even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, as a graduate student in sociology, studying social inequality and social integration issues in the military. My dissertation advisor was actually the one who first proposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell as a compromise when forces were mobilizing to sort of further solidify and restrict the ban that was in place at the time and open service. We were doing some exploratory work. I did hand-collected survey data and interviews, qualitative work on attitudes toward the ban. And over the years, I've periodically had the opportunity to conduct research, review research, participate in panels, advise, or have insights on some of the decision-making processes and some of the implementation challenges in the military. So I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone and participating in the discussion, and hope I can contribute.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as a reminder for all of our attendees, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to submit them during the panel discussion, and we will read them to the panelists during the Q&A portion towards the end of this panel. Well, we'd like to get right into the conversation, right? I think that this has been a policy that many of us may have heard of, or may have done research on, but rarely do we get to have these very helpful and core discussions around the impacts of this policy. And so to kick it off, Laura, the first question is for you. Can you provide an overview of the key findings from your research on the mental health of LGBTQ plus service members during and after the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era?
Thank you. Yes. And in true, I guess, researcher fashion, I'll qualify up front that there are some limitations to what we know. Of course, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is don't asking. So in terms of having official data that's asked people about their gender identity and sexual orientation, there's limited availability of that from official records and from approved surveys and from administrative data. But we still know quite a bit from oral histories, autobiographies, testimonies, qualitative research, journalistic accounts. We have a lot of information. So I also want to sort of take us back or get us in the mind frame of that era, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era. So the policy was very ambiguous. What does it mean, don't tell? If you have a picture of you and your partner, or even just your partner on your desk, is that telling? So it's an ambiguous policy. The policy was shifting. Some of it was under DOD control. Some of it was legislated in the law by Congress. And there were other policies that had shifted over time too. For example, what units or occupations were open to women, some open, some closed. So there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly how is this policy implemented. The idea was your orientation is accepted, but you had to avoid homosexual behavior, right? You had to and the language very much at the time was homosexual and gay and lesbian, open gay and lesbian service. The broader conversation was not much beyond that. And the society was not nearly as accepting as it is today. I mean, it was after this, it was 1997 that Ellen, famously made her public statement on TV, "I'm gay," and that was like a huge headline. So maybe hard to imagine today that environment. So a lot of what we know, if you think about the mental health, imagine the stress and anxiety of being discovered, being accused, your behavior being scrutinized, your appearance being scrutinized, active work at that time, policing it. This affected this also extended to cisgender heterosexual populations as well, very much forcing a conformity in terms of appearance, behavior, contributing to sexual coercion to prove that you're not gay or lesbian. You can imagine the impact on your social support networks, being able to fully belong and experience that aspect of military service, of your, bonding with your comrades, your being able to turn to people, being open, even going to not being able to use other types of healthy coping mechanisms, like talking to a chaplain or talking to a mental health counselor. They were also officers. So at that time, you didn't have the confidentiality. People would go and try to seek help, but then they would be reported to the command and then face discharges. Also, the impact on family functioning. If you imagine family formation, functioning, access to benefits, and then imagine not being able to report harms against you or crimes, because the investigation could then lead to discovery, which again could lead to discharge. You're losing your career, right? This is your career, this is your life. Having a less than honorable discharge on your record, losing benefits after it. I think maybe you can tell I could go on and on and on, but just giving a broad overview of that time and how, I think, significant it is and potential impacts even years later.
No, definitely. I really appreciate that answer, Laura. Something that I really tuned into was the stress and anxiety of just being accused, and being, having your appearance scrutinized. Unfortunately, I think that is something that a lot of the individuals a part of this community deal with, but not to the extent, right? Like you said, it was their livelihood. This was their job. So I can only imagine the fear that, individuals had under this policy. And with that, I would like to invite Lindsay, into the conversation as well. Lindsay, how did the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy impact your personal and professional life during your service? And how did it shape your journey to founding Minority Veterans of America?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Laura, I feel like you just told my story of my service. It's funny, I wrote notes and I feel like you were reading from my script. So that's interesting. So something I remember is that Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the policy, the military isn't just a job. It's an entire ecosystem of support. It's a family, it's a military, it's a healthcare system, it's your benefits, it's where you get your food, it's where you live. It's an entire society that you're hiding from. So I lived on base and I had to hide everywhere I went. When you live off base, it's a little bit different, but you're in this society that you have to hide so deeply and intensely the secret that can not just get you kicked out of the military, but get you they always tell you that the dishonorable discharge is the equivalent of a felony on your record. So when you go to get a job, when you go to get anything else in life, you basically you're setting yourself up in the future for more likely to go to jail, more likely to experience mental health disparities. All of those pieces kind of come along with the idea of losing not just your job, but your whole life. So the fear isn't just I'm going to get fired today. It's actually, I'm going to lose everything that I know, and I'm going to be sent to the gates and they're going to tell me goodbye. So kind of keeping that in mind of the culture that we all kind of lived in, that was our regular everyday lives. And so for me, I actually tell people I joined the military twice. Once when I was 18 years old and I was in the delayed entry program, and I figured out I was LGBTQ, and I was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This is 2003. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in its height, and I decided not to do it. I waited 5 years, and I'm third generation military. We have lots and lots of people in my family that are military, and I decided to join in 2008 because I knew that serving my country was more important to me than my own individual sexual orientation, which I think is a pretty common theme, especially among post 9/11 veterans, that you were called to service, you needed to support the country, and you're going to go do it even at the detriment to yourself. I went from being a drag king to being a sailor, which is the hardest transition I've ever made, is going from from this like very open, expressive person and into a closet. So when I joined the military, I was very good at being in the military. I was a military kid and like family, and I was very good at this part, but I looked like this. And so I said to myself, if the military can't accept me looking like this, even if I don't, engage into the things that they want me to, then I'm not meant for this place. And so what that actually ended up doing is setting me up for the ways in which I was criminalized. My identity, I got in trouble for my faux hawk and my, like my faddish hairstyles and my, civilian clothes. I was harassed on a regular basis. And that was just completely acceptable. Nobody was going to stop that. Laura, you spoke about coercion. I had a person tell me that they would tell my superiors if I stopped sleeping with them that we had already slept together. And so in that case, like sexual coercion happens because we literally cannot do anything about it. More than likely, we are going to end up criminalizing and penalizing ourselves when we go to tell them that we are experiencing harm. So you just do it. You do whatever you have to get through it. I ended up getting severely injured and spent 65 days in the hospital over 3 surgeries while I was in the military. I actually broke up with somebody for sending me 2 dozen roses in the hospital because I was terrified I was going to get caught, that this woman had sent me flowers in the hospital. And so that idea of the caregiver being your support network, I didn't have one. I wasn't allowed one. I had my mom, which was lovely, and like your partner is the person that you want next to you and by your side. We couldn't do that because we were likely to get kicked out while I also had my chest sewed open and then I had a 9.5-inch metal rod in my chest. And I'm terrified at this point in the worst moments of my life that I'm going to end up ruining my life by telling somebody that I have a secret. So all of that to say, this experience of serving under this policy is so much more than an occupation. It's so much more than anything that we can even put words on. It's truly that these scars will never go. So when I left the military in 2012, I went back to the University of Washington. I was trying to find myself. I worked with student veterans, started a department on campus, all of these things. And it still was exclusionary. And I just, in 2017, my co-founder and I, 12 days after the trans ban, decided to start Minority Veterans of America because we had seen the first assault on reproductive rights, we had seen the Muslim ban, and then the trans ban came. And I knew what was coming because I had already lived under this policy. It was just a different iteration of it. And so it actually was part of the precipice of starting this organization that now has actually struck down the ban. In 2021, we were a part of the movement to try to get that to happen within the first 60 days of this administration. It happened in 19. And so it's been a long road, but this policy has deeply impacted my life and is part of the reason why we exist.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for sharing that. And I want to emphasize, that personal story that you shared with us, right? That caregiver. Not only did you have to worry about your physical health, but also worrying about being exposed just for being the person that you are. And so something that really affects the LGBTQ plus community is, right, our families look different, our caregivers look different, and we should be accepted, for who we are. And so I thank you for sharing that very personal story. It was very touching. Agent Q, I turn over this question over to you. Following Lindsay's, comments of consistent harassment, sexual coercion, you see all of these negative consequences under this policy. Can you share your experiences of serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and how it affected your mental health and identity?
Absolutely. I think that the context of my story is pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell into Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I can give an interesting point of view. I think that for all intents and purposes, people or the military wants to give the guise of we need this policy to maintain order. But as we know, life is life. And pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell, my experience was it was more like Hollywood, where they would match up certain stars with each other because they knew they were the same. We knew who each other was. There was no Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So we would see each other and know each other. I don't know if it's that gaydar or whatever it is, but we knew each other. And just like every other thing that we champion that we're in front of, the gays were the Marine of the Quarter. They were really visible people. So we are looking at them as visible people and like, okay, oh my God, everybody has to keep the secret, but the secret is the same secret because we all have something to lose. So that is one thing. Pre Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was also, I noticed a basic witch hunt literally the NIS would come in and I would see my friends, who we knew each other, and they were getting discharged all of a sudden. And I'm like, to me, if the wording is homosexual activity, they can't discharge you unless they catch you in homosexual activity or, you admit to them. And I would, pull them aside. What happened? And they were like, they asked me and I told, hence don't ask, don't tell. So they would end up getting kicked out, less than honorable, not dishonorable discharge, but less than honorable. And for me, one, seeing that and being like, watching my back, literally to having somebody, at one point, I was in a room as a sergeant by myself. So this person comes into the room and starts asking me these weird questions like, oh, on Oprah Winfrey, they had this gay person, really, really forward. What do you think of that? And I was like, oh, set up. You know what I mean? So I think that there are ways that they specifically try to infiltrate us and set us up in a witch hunt post Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because there was groups of us bonding together because there was no other support system. Mind you, that's different from being gay and in the gay community and having community or people around you or somewhere to go, which is amazing. Of what we have now with the minority veterans of America are doing. When you think of Stonewall and the revolutions, just spaces that were safe for us. It was a space that was, within an organization, within the organization. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell happened, it pretty much to me disappeared because it was don't ask, don't tell, but now it was out for everybody. Whereas we had our private community that there was something less about us because we're not asking them and we don't telling them. And the fear was there, but it was more of like, from going to be a Marine, which is basically a light-skinned Marine, or a dark-skinned Marine, or, everybody was a Marine, to I am different because there's a policy that exists that says that I'm different and I can't ask or tell, because now if I do and the person that I know within our community doesn't, they have something over me. So it's sort of completely changed the game of the private society to something where people could use something against you, where we could cannibalize ourselves and put ourselves at risk. Complete change.
No, I definitely, and to emphasize, right, one of the things that you mentioned, right, is having that community. And I think that's why, Forge Health offers these specialty programmings, LGBTQ plus specialty program, veterans and first responders, because there are nuances to these communities and identities because of situations like all of you are describing here today. And I want to highlight that actually Forge Health just posted a blog post about why specialty programming is important for this community. So just check it out on our website at forgehealth.com. But I also want to highlight two of those comments that you said as well, feeling less and feeling different. That is a common theme that we see in these discussions, in discussions today still. And so with that, Eric, I would like to ask you, how did your experiences under Don't Ask, Don't Tell influence your decision to start Forge Health? And what specific mental health challenges did you observe in LGBTQ plus veterans and first responders?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. Thank you very much, and again, thank you all for joining us and talking about this. And I'll throw, I'm going to tell some of my personal story, and I want to throw some trigger warnings out there that there's going to be some intense traumatic stuff, but. I was coming out at the time when I was in the military, right? I joined the military. I thought joining the military would make me straight, right? That was the thing that I thought would help me kind of be a macho dude and move forward. So you got to realize these are your formative years, right? And to what Lindsay brought up, this is an ecosystem that they create this ecosystem. It's not just your job; it is your identity. It is your absolute identity. And if you're struggling with your internal identity, and then you've got a policy in place where you don't know anytime, as an officer, anytime I got called into my commanding officer's office, I thought my life was over, right? Not just my job was gone, but my life was over, right? And it for me, one of the things that happened, I was forward deployed in Japan, and unfortunately, one of my sailors died by suicide, died in the ambulance with me on the way to the hospital. And traumatic experience, what do you do at that point? You try to get help. And I had friends that said, oh, you need to talk to the on-base psychologist or psychiatrist, right? And I didn't want to. And the reason I didn't want to was because I didn't want them. I could never fully be open with a psychiatrist or psychologist, right? Because you can't process all of the other things that are going on, right? So what did I do? I turned to drinking. And then what did that create? That created, I would black out on base or anytime we would go to a port call, and I'd be worried that I said something, and I would have panic attacks for months thinking that I said something or did something that would have gotten me. So it created a very toxic environment. And I think one of the things that even within our own community, when we tried to create, and some of us remember OutServe, right? That was like, we had these secret Facebook groups that we would try to connect with everybody. OutServe was one of the advocacy groups that worked, and I worked with them very closely to try to overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell over the years. And even within that, it was a very, even from what we would call a peer support standpoint, it was very toxic because everybody was so on edge. Everybody's baseline anxiety was so high that you really couldn't process any of this stuff. And it opened up opportunities for people to take advantage of you, right? So I for example, had met with more senior officers that were LGBTQ, and we, under the auspices of trying to get the policy overturned. And it was such a toxic environment because of the structural things that within the DoD that made it that way. Bad things happened, right? Like bad things happened, and you couldn't even report the bad things that happened, right? Because if you reported that, to whoever's point, I think it was Laura that said it, that investigation could lead you to losing your career, losing everything. And again, right, I say losing your career, it's losing your identity, right? So how I started Forge, right? Eric Freeman, who I started Forge with, his brother is my best friend. We were in ROTC together. He was the first person I came out to. And when after my traumatic experiences on deployment, I came out to my family disowned me. And Eric's family took me in as my family. And sorry, guys, to me, having that family and that support system was so vital, right? And we started this because we wanted to create a space that we could do this, right? That we could provide real healthcare, right? And again, this isn't to bash. I'm not trying to. I would never bash on the VA here at all. But there are even now, right? Even now, there are issues with LGBTQ specific care at the VA, right? And it's not the VA's fault. It's a lot of the group therapy. There's a lot of things that are creating not very healthy environments for folks at VAs, right? So that's why we started this. That's why we want to do it. And that's the importance of these specialty populations, is to create a place where people can be themselves and process some of the stuff that we all went through, veterans and first responders. We touch trauma, right? And you can't work through trauma if you can't be your authentic self.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that. Super, super touching. And I think a lot of us, especially myself, can relate to those experiences in terms of hiding your identity and hiding your true self, and using unsafe and really not helpful coping mechanisms, and then worrying about, did I come out accidentally? Did I say the wrong thing to someone? And so living always in this mode of anxiety and fear can really trigger a lot of negative consequences, in our behaviors. And so I invite all panelists to come off mute, and I want to make this question a more based question. So to all panelists, and Q, I thank you for coming off mute. I will let you start with this, but I invite everyone to join in. In your view, what are the long-term mental health impacts of Don't Ask, Don't Tell on LGBTQ plus service members, both during and after their service?
Well, I think number one, back to what I said before, there's a certain part of us needing to feel safe and have safe spaces. And, it may seem like a new term because I'm kind of old school, the trauma of carrying that back into civilian life, that trauma of I'm not good enough. Because again, we're in an organization where we are serving our country, literally it's the most physically extreme thing that anybody has done. The mental games and the mental part of it is something that we've invested our full self into. So as veterans coming out, still carrying that around, or that thought, was I not good enough? And, I can serve my country, but I can't, so there's still something to that, especially when you get out into the community now, as we see the LGBT community, and there's a lot of acceptance. I'm going to Pride in New York, this week, and I know when I go, there's so much corporate sponsorship, of it, but are they really seeing us, or are they not?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's, a very important, subject, right? I love that, not love, but what stuck with me in that comment, I can serve my country, but not myself, right? And so having that stuck and ingrained in you, I'm sure had devastating effects. And so, Lindsay, Laura, I also invite you in to share, your thoughts on this topic.
Laura, do you want to go first or you want me to? You go first.
Well, I'd just like to raise as a question, so maybe I'll go first because maybe you can address it then. Just thinking about the long-term impacts on your ability to trust, right? If you are for years in an environment where you're not sure, who might be trying to ferret you out or who might report you or who you can trust, like then just for years living like that, what impact that could have on just your lifelong ability to feel like you can be comfortable and trust other people.
Yeah, I thank you for going first because I do some training and education on the legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, mental health implications, and do some suicide prevention work. One of the things I talk about a lot is like the idea that you have this like two parts of yourself in one brain, that you have like basically separated yourself into two people in service. So you have your military self that does all of the patriotic things, goes to the barbecues, does all the like required fun, all of that. And then there's this queer self of yours, and to some degree or another, you're either very closeted or you're like me and you just pride jumped everywhere you could and just kind of risked it, depending on your level of risk during the service. But you have this kind of like two parts of yourself. So when you go to leave the military and reintegrate into society, you still have these two parts of yourself, and people don't understand either one of them. So it took me a lot of years and a couple of accidental conversations, like panels that I showed up to thinking I was going to be the token LGBTQ person in the veteran panel. And then all of a sudden I was the veteran on the LGBTQ panel. And I just got all confused. And I realized I had to put these two parts of myself back together. And that was really hard in the like schism that I had in my brain of these two people. And so much like many of my colleagues that served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I'm divorced. I have a lovely spouse now that it took a long time to be able to trust that I could be this person in society, right? Like I was a civilian, nobody was coming after me, but it didn't make it any easier for me to bring my wife to places that I was doing veteran things, nor was it easy for me to bring veterans around my queer people. So like even in traditional society among queer people is like an anti-police, anti-military vibe. And among military veterans, you have an anti-LGBTQ vibe. And so where do we belong? And so I really struggled with this, like, and I think a lot of people do, is like, where do we belong if we don't belong in the veteran community and we don't belong in the LGBTQ community? Where do we exist in a place that we're supported and understood for the extreme distress that we served under? I also think there's a really important conversation that needs to be had around diagnosis of post-traumatic stress as a result of living under these policies. It's not a VA rated thing. You could maybe get PTSD, but they're probably not going to rate you for it. Even though you're serving under these discriminatory policies that leave long-term mental health impacts, and you're more like, I'm 5.85 times more likely to have suicidal ideation just because I'm a transgender veteran. Like those types of things should not be disparities that we see on a regular basis, and yet we do. We see, Eric, you talked about alcohol use disorder. That's a common thing. Like I know when I got out of the military, I couldn't function, and I drank a lot, like a lot more than I should have. But that was the only coping mechanism that I knew as this like person that lived under this policy in my most formative years. And so there's a lot of pieces about this. And I think even as I go, like I've been out in the military for 12 years, I was only in for 4. You would think that I would be like, cool, everything's good. It's actually not. I still unpack these things on a regular basis. And I think that's the part that like patience with LGBTQ veterans is really important because we don't even know like how deep these scars go. We're still unpacking the actual like flesh wound. So yeah, that's kind of what I got.
No, that's super helpful. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to say, just to piggyback on that, right? I think just being in the veteran space and working in veteran advocacy work, right? You run into that all the time. You run into that dual. I mean, there's so many folks in the veteran. I mean, Lindsay, I remember telling you the story about with one of the, I'm not going to say his name, a congressman that basically didn't know I was LGBTQ and was like, well, Erica, you're doing some great work at Forge with suicide prevention, but I wish the VA would care more about suicide prevention than these queer centers they're trying to open up, right? And there is like, and that was verbatim, right? That's somebody in a congressional position that's making these decisions. So, for me, living under that policy, I still have trouble coming out to people, right? Still to this day, right? So I think that's an important thing. The after effects of this really affect you as a person.
100%. And I think that's one of the core messages that we really believe in here at Forge Health is about the intersectionality of our communities, our identities, right? We can't just be viewed as this one single silo, right? We have to take into account the full person. And I think that's what's so great about this conversation today is really highlighting, that you can be a part of the LGBTQ plus community and also serve in the military, right? And vice versa. So look, I think Lindsay also brought up, staggering facts about the rates of suicide, of mental illness, of substance abuse in the LGBTQ plus population. And so with that, Laura, what does recent research say about how the mental health of LGBTQ plus veterans compare to their non-LGBTQ plus counterparts?
Yes, and to speak to your point, LGBTQ plus veterans are not a monolithic group, and there are of course, a lot of variation. But just as a broader overview, I'll just refer to research on sexual minorities compared to heterosexual cisgender populations. We've had a number of studies over the recent years, probably at least more than a decade. And the cumulative research is showing higher incidence of depression, of moderate to severe depression, of self-injury, of risky behavior, or you might see as maladaptive coping behaviors like binge drinking and smoking, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, also reporting related, as you can imagine, these things are constellations and cumulative effect of unwanted sexual contact, experiencing physical abuse. And as we know, like, mental health is not like an entirely separate realm from physical health, right? They are interrelated. One can contribute to the other. So you'll also see significant differences on physical health, some chronic illnesses, chronic conditions, stroke, other, just taking it as the entirety of that. And then you imagine then the cumulative effects of trying to manage that and those interferences and disruptions with your life, right? With your employment, with your functioning, with your relationships with others.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
No, and with that, right? And I think that's what's, why we're highlighting this is organizations like Forge Health and Minority Veterans of America are so important, for addressing these concerns. And so, Lindsay and Agent Q, how does Minority Veterans of America support LGBTQ plus veterans today? And what mental health services are most in demand?
So there's a couple of things. So first is we do a lot of policy advocacy. The legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell is not just one that is overturned by a policy. It's actually one that has a lot of other pieces baked into it. And so we do things ranging from discharge upgrades and working towards the systemic overview of all of the 13,000 Don't Ask, Don't Tell discharges that were issued and trying to get those upgraded. And so we do some work on character of discharge. We also do a lot of work on the anti-discrimination protections at VA. If you're not familiar, the Affordable Care Act required that all government agencies provide healthcare to implement rulemaking from the section, it's called Section 1557, which is an anti-discrimination section. VA, DOD, none of them have done it. The only people that have are the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we are trying desperately to get them to implement anti-discrimination protections, because right now there really aren't any. You can go to a VA facility and you can get harassed equally, whether it be in a bathroom or by your provider or literally anywhere on a VA campus. So we are working really hard to bring that issue to light and to make sure that the veterans, Laura, you talked about trust. The institutional betrayal of going from the service where you're just discriminated against on a regular basis, there's laws against you, to go to a VA that you're discriminated against from even trying to get a healthcare, will break you. It will break your entire soul. It's nearly broken me several times just being harassed. I've been chased into bathrooms. I've been told that my pronouns don't matter. I've been told any range of things that's happened at a VA hospital, and it's horrible. But I keep going because I run an organization and I have to. But a lot of people haven't. When you talk about health impacts, people actually just don't go, and the long-term impacts of delayed care and prolonged care actually ends up killing people. So whether it's mental health stuff or that we waited too long to get a cancer screening, it can actually lead to long-term physical health and mental health impacts that are not accounted for. We also do a lot of work on data collection because, if you're not familiar, DOD and VA don't collect this information on gender identity, sexual orientation. VA did try to start screening in healthcare settings last year. The question is horrible. They don't know what they're doing with the data. I was asked if I was LGBTQ and my doctor asked me what queer meant. So it's super awkward and uncomfortable, and it actually isn't working. So we do a lot of work on data collection because truly if we can't see a problem, we can't fix it, and we can't dedicate resources towards something that we don't have information about. And without the information about data and what it actually is leading to, people are not able to make the strategic investments that are necessary to actually create positive impact. On a programmatic side, we actually do a lot of work in Washington State. We are opening the very first LGBTQ transitional housing for veterans in October. We are also opening a community center for minority veterans because we recognize that there really isn't a place for us. And so we do a lot of work on the ground, a lot of programs and things like that, but really just trying to create a space for people to belong, because that's really it. Like, the belonging sense is really hard to expand and make scalable, but really just connecting people to each other and then really working on the programs, the policy side, to make the long term better for the next generation, because at some point we're all going to get real tired and quit, and the next generation is going to need to have a starting point, and it needs to be further than where we started.
Definitely. No, I appreciate all of those achievements and all of the progress that your organization has done. I think that I speak on behalf of many of us that we applaud you for the work that you're doing for the community. Agent Q, would you like to add anything to that response?
I'm excited. Yes, I would. I'm really excited to be working with Minority Veterans of America because, I have a passion for veterans and I am part of the community. And I think what's important here for me is creating the safe spaces. Again, LGBTQ veterans. How are we creating safe spaces where even if there's a transition to being, traumatized, there's a space where they can come and feel safe and be supported by community programs. And that's something that we can expand. I'm in communications. So for me, I want the word to be out that you have these safe spaces and there's people here for you to support.
You just muted by accident.
Because we understand where you're coming from. So that's why I had to add.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Robert, I wanted to add one thing. I didn't answer the second part of your question about what mental health services are most in demand. I will say this, the mental health services that most of us are looking for are the same as dominant culture folks, but what we are looking for is a culturally informed lens. Somebody who has some excuse me, fucking training on how to treat us with any type of dignity and respect. As a trans non-binary person, having to explain myself to my therapist every time that I want to go get a new one, every time I want to get a new doctor, every time I move, literally, it's about culturally informed care. We want the same things. I want therapy. I want, access to medication. I want, the same things that most of my dominant culture counterparts want, but I just want to be treated with some level of dignity and respect, and to the point that I'm not going to get harassed. So it's really basic. Honestly, it's learn a little bit about us so that you don't create more harm. And we want the same things as our counterparts.
Exactly, Lindsay. And that is a perfect segue into Eric. I would like to invite you to sort of highlight what we're doing here at Forge Health, to provide quality behavioral health services, both to the LGBTQ plus and veterans and first responders communities.
Absolutely, Rob. Yeah, and to piggyback up what Lindsay said, it's that NQ, it's that cultural competence and having that safe space, and we're providing that, right? All of our clinicians are getting trained in cultural competence, where folks don't have to explain themselves, right? Or, language matters, right? I think that's a big thing. I talk to a lot of LGBTQ veterans, and when they go to the VA to go just get PrEP, right? They send them to the infection control department, right? So like, there are things that like matter that doesn't make somebody feel good. So what we're trying to do is create a very safe and culturally competent space, not just for LGBTQ folks, but LGBTQ veterans, which is a segmented population, that we have a specialty in, and I want to continue to grow that specialty, right? I think that's it's in our DNA to be able to provide that care, that trauma-informed care, and most of us have touched trauma in some way, shape, or form as LGBTQ veterans. So really, it's that trauma-informed care and that LGBTQ cultural competence that is vital to what we're doing.
100%. And something that I'd also like to add on, to Lindsay's comment as well is, here at Forge is that we've taken serious steps to make all of our forms, all of our clinics a very inclusive and diverse environment. And so we are beginning to capture all the demographic information on sexual orientation, gender identity, to ensure that our providers, as well as any referring out, patients, are being treated properly, and that any provider who is seeing a Forge patient has the knowledge of their identity. And so, we are very proud of the steps that we're taking here at Forge to provide this inclusive as well as culturally competent care. So moving along, on the topic around sort of policy and advocacy, Laura, I invite you, for this question. Are there any recent or ongoing studies at RAND Corporation that aim to address gaps in mental health care for LGBTQ plus veterans?
Yes, actually, there was just a report released by my colleagues that I was very interested to read. It's called The State of Health and Healthcare for LGBTQ plus Veterans, the State of Health and Healthcare for LGBTQ veterans plus veterans. It's, it can be, like most of our research, can be downloaded for free from the RAND website. So this study documents not only some of these differences in mental and physical health that have been reported on surveys from 2015 to 2021, but also some disparities in access to healthcare. So sexual minorities being more likely to report that they were unable to afford healthcare in the past year, and that was particularly more so among transgender veterans. Less likely to have health insurance. And it's so that it addresses not only those results, but also the policy environment, the state policy environment and context related to health care seeking. And it's interesting, one of the points that they raise are related to challenges accessing benefits is for those veterans who were discharged with the less than honorable conditions under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that there is a process, although perhaps a burdensome and complex process, but there is a process to request to have that discharge upgraded if it was solely related to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And then reinstate, or to restore the rights to access the benefits that come with being a veteran. So they recommend, expanding the knowledge of that and making it easier for those veterans to apply for that upgrade.
Great. Thank you so much, Flora, for sharing. And Lindsay, thank you so much for sharing the link in the chat box for all of our attendees. We are coming close to time, so I want to remind all attendees, if they have any questions, to submit them. We have a few that came in, but before we get to the Q&A part, I want to leave everyone with sort of, a final thought from our panelists. And I'll start with you, Agent Q. How can allies and the broader veteran community better support the mental health and well-being of LGBTQ+ veterans?
I think, just as human beings, we want to feel a sense of, reaching out an olive branch, that we are one, that you have support, you have a shoulder to lean on, you have someone to talk to, and you have someone to tell the truth to. And then we are here for you. I mean, there's so much going on in the world right now. I think that it's never going to be something that goes out of style to say, hey, can I give you a hug? Or, hey, I'm here for you. Those are important human things that everyone needs.
Couldn't have said it better. I love that answer. Thank you, Agent Q. Lindsay, what advice would you give to LGBTQ+ service members currently serving in the military regarding mental health and seeking support?
Boy, so many things. First and foremost, it's okay to feel shame. It's okay to feel guilt and to feel like you are carrying an unreasonably large burden, and it's your job to get up every day and keep doing it. I know when I was in the military, I almost died by suicide. I almost jumped out of my 5th floor window. I couldn't take it anymore. And I tell that story. I've told that story to leaders in every single state, every single territory, because I think it's important to recognize that we're struggling and we are shameful about those struggles that we have. And it's so hard to connect to people, but it's okay to need help. And for me, it was people like community that supported me that was the most important and capable force for me to stay alive. And if you're serving and it feels hard, or even if it doesn't, find your people. Q talked about it, and Eric, I think you probably have the same stories of your underground friends that everybody's kind of uses as protection, and those are your people. Those are the people that are going to keep you safe and alive. And so my thoughts are, find your people. Don't be afraid to tell people that you're not well, and just break that shame barrier. It's the hardest one to break.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Really appreciate you sharing that. And Eric, for our final question, what is the one key message or takeaway you want the audience to remember about the mental health legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
Yeah, I would say that there needs to be more research done on this topic and the after effects on this. So Laura, take that back to your counterparts. But I do think that the after effects of this policy and the veterans that serve through this policy, we're going to continue to see the mental health implications for many years to come. And there needs to be more policy initiatives towards that, and outside of and I'm not saying but discharge upgrades are not going to solve the damage that this policy had done to all of us, right? That have served in this policy. So, yeah.
Definitely. No, thank you, Eric. And, we have time for about 2 questions from the audience. I know we received, an abundance of questions, so I will try to get to, some of these questions. And actually, Eric, this question's for you. In what ways did this policy affect the behavior and attitudes of non-LGBTQ+ service members toward their LGBTQ+ peers under this policy?
And that's a good question. That's a very good question. Yeah. I think a lot of us, I think it goes back to stigma and shame and fear. I remember coming out to my two best friends in the Navy, and I didn't do it until, gosh, 6 years after I got out, right? It took that long. And they literally couldn't have, they literally, not only did they not care, they were upset that I didn't tell them sooner, right? So I think a lot of us, we go through some pretty intense stuff together, right? Whether it be boot camp or OCS or like actual service, right? You really create, you become family. They are your family. And you know, I think it was, there's always going to be people that are going to be bigoted about LGBTQ people, but I think for the most part, it didn't matter as much. From my perspective, but I'd love to hear from the other panelists too, from Lindsay as well.
Oh, I love that you believe that anybody believed I was straight. Everybody I knew was like, it was always known, and it was kind of this thing that we all just held together in silence and secret, but like I was never hidden by any means. So, thinking about my peer, yeah, I don't know, I had a different experience. I didn't hide very well.
And one, I'll try and sneak in one more question, and this one's for you, Laura. Are there any gaps in the research that need to be addressed to fully understand the policy's impact?
Yes, I think to build on Eric's point, I think we also need to know not just what are the disparities, but what helps. What makes a difference? What has a positive impact? You know, Forge, part of your purpose, your mission is to have evidence-based strategies. So sort of, and it's wonderful that you're collecting data, but just a broader understanding of what are the needs, and not just applying standards, you know, science that's been developed for mental health care in general, but for these particular needs of this population. So what are the needs, and how can they be best addressed?
Thank you, Laura. And
I'll
go ahead,
jump in on
Lindsay.
this too. Sorry, I know we had a conversation before this, and one of the things that I think going back to some research that's needed, I'm sure that many of you have heard the data that there's 1 million LGBTQ veterans, which is not a very accurate number or an accurate number at all. That number was built on a 1999 prevalence study by an organization that doesn't even exist anymore. I don't think, Eric, you weren't out yet. I wasn't out yet. I hadn't served yet. I mean, the number of LGBTQ veterans alone is really unknown. The number of people that were harmed by this policy, also unknown. So we're looking at, like, when we think about data and when we think about studies, the LGBTQ community for veterans and military service members is so far behind literally every other community, whether you look at race, gender, for cisgender women, there's more research that's been done on all of these communities. You know exactly, well-ish, how many people there are in service. You know how many people there are in general society. We don't know those numbers or even that baseline data for our community. So when we talk about research, we are 25 years behind because of this policy, because we had to hide, because we had to exist under this policy. We are so far behind that it's going to take a lot to catch us up.
Thank you, Lindsay. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
I was just saying, and the impact is even greater, because then what are the impacts on the spouses, the partners, the children, like the community, the negative impact, of course, that there has been on the military, of the people that were discharged, that were excellent performers, made important contributions, were very much needed linguists, where it's just it's so vast, and it's really, I think most of it is not yet captured.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you all to our panelists for joining today, sharing your personal stories. It was super informative, and you know, I think that we've made great strides, but there's a lot of progress to be made. And so once again, I thank you all for your service. I thank you for attending today and speaking openly and freely. And as it serves as a reminder why specialty programming, that understands the core concepts of these communities and individuals are so important for better clinical outcomes. And so once again, thank you to Forge Health, thank you for to Minority Vets of America for providing resources to these communities. And thank you all for your to the attendees. A recording of this will be found on our YouTube channel. And thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank everyone.
Thank you.